Today is day 1. So this week, I decided I would set myself one goal. I'm calling 100 business owners, laundromats, car washes, landscaping companies, vending routes. I'm cold calling 100 business owners to find out if anyone is thinking about selling their business or willing to meet with me. Not because I'm good at sales. I'm terrible. Not because I already know how to buy businesses. I don't. Honestly, I wasn't even sure what I was going to say. I just knew something had to change. Because after making my first video, I realized something uncomfortable. Watching videos about buying businesses isn't the same as buying one. Eventually, you have to leave your desk, pick up the phone, and risk sounding stupid. That terrified me. Not because I thought people would yell at me, but because I'd run out of excuses. Here's exactly what happened, call by call. Please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss anything about acquiring small businesses, seller financing, earnouts, no money down deals. Before dialing my first number, I stared at the phone for almost 10 minutes. Seriously, I kept finding little jobs to do instead. Maybe I should organize my spreadsheet first. Maybe I should research the company a little more. Maybe I should practice my script one more time. Sound familiar? What nobody tells you, none of that matters if you can't get an owner on the phone who's willing to talk.
The problem is, nobody accidentally becomes a business owner. Eventually, someone has to make the first call. So, I took a deep breath, pressed dial, and waited. Then someone answered. Hello? My heart was pounding so hard, I almost forgot why I called. The first call lasted about 30 seconds. The owner politely said they weren't interested. Then they hung up. That was it. No dramatic speech, no angry reaction, no movie moment. Just no thanks. I sat there for a second, and then something unexpected happened. I realized I survived. The thing I'd spent hours worrying about was over in less than a minute. So, I called the next one. Voicemail. The third one? Voicemail. The fourth? Wrong number. The fifth? Voicemail. The seventh? The owner had already retired. By the 10th call, I had absolutely nothing to show for it. No meeting, no opportunity, no potential deal. Just a page full of crossed-out business names. And I'll admit, I started wondering if this entire idea was stupid. Maybe buying a business wasn't realistic. Maybe everyone else already knew something I didn't. Maybe I should go back to watching YouTube videos like everyone else.
That's the funny thing about taking action. Reality shows up much faster than motivation does. Nobody posts this part online. You usually only see the success story after everything worked. You don't see the awkward silence, the rejected calls, or someone staring at a phone wondering if they should quit after 10 attempts. But this is where almost everyone stops. Then I remembered something I'd written in my notebook before starting this challenge. The goal isn't to buy a business today. The goal is to become the kind of person who eventually can. Those are completely different goals. One depends on luck. The other depends on repetition. So I stopped measuring success by yeses. Instead, I started measuring success by calls made. Call 20. Still no deal. Call 24. Another voicemail. Call 29. The owner told me they weren't selling, but instead of ending the conversation, I asked one more question. Out of curiosity, have you ever thought about retiring? There was a pause. Then they laughed. Actually, my wife asks me that every week. For the first time all day, the conversation changed. We didn't talk about buying the business. We talked about them, how long they'd owned it, how many employees they had, how difficult it had become to find reliable workers, how they hadn't taken a real vacation in almost 15 years. That's when something clicked. I wasn't calling businesses. I was calling people. People with families. People with dreams. People who had spent decades building something they cared about. Some were exhausted. Some were proud. Some couldn't imagine letting go. Others wanted to retire yesterday. And I realized that my biggest mistake was that I was thinking the goal of the call was to buy the business. It wasn't. The goal was to earn another 5 minutes of conversation. That's it.
Nobody sells a company to a stranger after 30 seconds. Trust doesn't work like that. It's built one conversation at a time. So I changed my approach. Instead of trying to sound impressive, I decided to sound honest. I stopped pretending I already knew everything. Instead, I said something like this. Hi, my name is... I'm learning how to buy small businesses. I know this might be a strange question, but have you ever thought about what happens to your business when you eventually decide to retire? That one sentence changed everything. Some people still said no. Some hung up immediately. A few told me I was crazy. But others, they stayed on the phone because nobody had ever asked them that question before. And once people started talking, I mostly stopped talking. I listened. I asked questions. I became curious. Some conversations lasted 3 minutes. Others lasted 30. By the time I reached call number 50, I still didn't have a business under contract, but something much more valuable had happened. I wasn't afraid of the phone anymore. And then, call number 67 happened. The owner answered with a tired voice. I gave my usual introduction. Hi, my name is... I'm learning how to buy small businesses. I was wondering if you've ever thought about retiring. Instead of saying no, he laughed. A long laugh. Then he said, You know, you're the third person who's asked me that this year. That caught me off guard. I asked, Really? He said, Yeah, I guess people think I'm getting old. We both laughed. Then he surprised me. I've actually been thinking about selling. I just don't know where to start. For a second, I completely forgot my next question, because this was the conversation I'd imagined before making that very first call. Except, it didn't feel like a business negotiation. It felt like two people having coffee. He started telling me about the business. You could hear the pride in his voice, but you could also hear something else. Exhaustion. He wanted peace of mind. He wanted to know the employees he'd worked beside for years would still have jobs. He wanted the customers to keep getting the same service they'd trusted for decades. After that conversation, I noticed that the owners who stayed on the phone the longest almost never talked about money first. They talked about people, their employees, their families, their customer, the local community. The business was part of their identity. By the time I reached call number 81, I still hadn't bought a business. But I'd gained something far more valuable: perspective. I realized buying a business isn't about finding desperate sellers. It's about finding owners who are ready for the next chapter of their lives. Some told me to call back next year. Some asked me to stay in touch. One owner even said, "I don't know if I'll ever sell, but I appreciate that you called." That sentence stuck with me, because success wasn't measured by getting a signed contract. It was measured by building relationships, one conversation at a time. And that's exactly when something happened that I never expected. One owner paused, then said 7 words. "You know what? Why don't you come by tomorrow?" I froze. For a second, I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. He repeated it. "Come take a look at the business." My heart started racing, because suddenly this wasn't practice anymore. This was real. The next morning, I almost canceled. I had the address written down. I had my notebook in my hand. I had practiced questions the night before, and I still sat in my car for 5 minutes wondering if I should drive away. Because walking into a real business felt different from making a phone call. A phone call can end in 30 seconds. A meeting makes everything more real. Then I remembered something. I wasn't showing up as an expert. I was showing up as someone willing to learn. That took some pressure off.
When I walked in, the owner greeted me with a smile. We sat down at a small table near the front of the business. I opened my notebook, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. So I said the truth. "Thanks for meeting with me. I'm still learning about buying businesses, but I really appreciate the chance to hear your story." That honesty changed the tone immediately. He relaxed, and then he started talking. He told me how he had started the business years ago, how hard the early days had been, how he had survived slow seasons, economic downturns, and difficult customers. He talked about employees who had become like family. He talked about customers who had been coming to the business for decades. He talked about retirement, not in a dramatic way, in a practical way. He was tired. He was proud of what he had built, but he also wanted more freedom. As he spoke, I realized something important.
My instinct was to jump ahead and ask financial questions: revenue, profit, expenses, seller financing. Those questions matter, but asking them too early would have missed the point. The point was to understand the person behind the business. So I asked questions like, what do you enjoy most about running the business? What has been the hardest part? What would you want to happen to the business after you retire? Those questions opened the conversation. He talked about his employees. He talked about customers he had served for years. He talked about wanting the business to continue serving the community. And then, naturally, we started talking about the business itself. He showed me around the operation. I noticed things I never would have learned from a spreadsheet. The way customers interacted with the staff, the condition of the equipment, the systems he had built over time, the little routines that kept the business running smoothly. This was the first time I truly understood why buying an existing business can be so valuable. You're not just buying equipment. You're not just buying revenue. You're buying relationships, processes, reputation, trust. And those things are difficult to measure on paper.
Before I left, I asked him one final question. What would an ideal transition look like for you? He thought for a moment. Then he said, I'd want someone who cares about the business. Someone who would take care of the employees and customers. That answer stayed with me, because it reminded me that this isn't just about finding a profitable deal. It's about becoming someone a business owner would trust with something they've spent years building. When I got back to my car, I wrote down everything I had learned. I realized I still had a lot to learn. I wasn't ready to buy a business that day, but I was no longer sitting on the sidelines, imagining what it might be like. I had made the calls. I had had the conversations. I had walked into a real business and listened to a real owner talk about his future. That was progress. By the time I finished all 100 calls, I had not bought a business, but I had gained something I couldn't have learned from another video. I had gained proof that opportunities are often hidden behind uncomfortable actions. The businesses were there. The owners were there. The conversations were there. The only thing missing had been my willingness to start. When I got home that evening, I opened my notebook. Out of 100 calls, 62 didn't pick up. That's the reality nobody posts about. 2/3 of your outreach disappears into voicemail. 23 picked up and said no immediately. Not interested, not selling, don't call again. Some hung up before I finished a sentence. 11 had a real conversation, asked questions and wanted to know who I was and what I was offering. 4 were open to a follow-up meeting. 1 turned into a real deal conversation that I'm still working through today.
If you're doing the math, that's a 1% close rate on getting a serious deal conversation started. And that number is exactly why most people quit after 15 calls and decide this doesn't work. It doesn't work at 15 calls. It works at volume. 1 conversation. That's all it takes. You don't need 100 businesses. You need 1 good one. Because success in business is about finding the one person who's already looking for someone like you. The biggest surprise was discovering how willing people were to share their stories. Because business owners love talking about what they've built. And that's where I am. Day 1. Still learning, still asking questions, still making mistakes, but finally moving. I think that's the biggest lesson from this challenge. Before these calls, I thought buying a business was mostly about spreadsheets. Now, I think it's mostly about relationships. After you've heard no enough times that it stops defining you, after you've proven to yourself that you're capable of taking action even when you're nervous, that's real confidence. Not feeling fearless, being willing to move anyway. When I uploaded my first video, I told you I wasn't pretending to be an expert. That hasn't changed. I'm still figuring this out. But every conversation makes the path a little clearer. Every mistake teaches me something a book never could. And every owner reminds me that behind every business is a person. That's what makes this journey exciting. Maybe my first acquisition happens next month. Maybe it takes another year. Maybe I walk away from several deals before I find the right one. Whatever happens, you'll see all of it. The wins, the awkward moments, the bad deals, the good deals, the uncertainty, progress. Because that's what this channel is really about. Not pretending success is easy. Showing what it actually looks like to earn it. If you've been waiting for the perfect time to start something, maybe this is your reminder that perfect never arrives. Whether it's buying a business, starting a side hustle, learning a new skill, or simply making one phone call you've been putting off, action beats perfection every single time. This week, I made 100 calls. Next week, I'm going back to meet business owners face to face. I'll start reviewing financial statements. I'll learn how to value businesses. And I'll see whether any of these conversations can turn into an actual acquisition. Honestly, I'm nervous, but that's probably a good sign because it means I'm doing something I've never done before. And that's exactly the point. So if you want to learn how ordinary people can buy real businesses without pretending it's easy, you're in the right place. Like, subscribe, comment, and let's keep building asset culture together. I'll see you in episode 3.